Prefer your true crime in podcast form? Want to listen on your favorite podcast platform? This episode was also uploaded as a podcast episode. This episode is not intended for children. No harm is intended to the victims described in this episode or their families. This episode is intended for educational purposes. Content warnings. This episode covers heavy subject matter and includes serious content warnings, including sexual assault, including that of a child, sexual assault that includes anal activity, incest, domestic violence and abuse, child abuse and neglect, strangulation, mentions of Nazi symbols and white supremacist groups, heavy drug use. Please, if any of the previous are a trigger for you, come back for another episode. Unfortunately, there's never any shortage of true crime. A special note just for any YouTube watchers. The format for these videos is changing. The subtitles and case photos will always be in the videos, but unfortunately these videos have to get simpler because I'm unable to cope with the huge amount of time it takes to video edit them on my old PC. I love you guys, and I hope that you'll still stick around even though this may be a disappointment to some of you. Hello, loves. Welcome to A Memory of Malice. As promised, I'm bringing you the second half of Marlow and Coffman. I know it's been a while. 2 weeks is a long time to wait, but hopefully this episode answers all your burning questions. If you're new here or you skipped the last episode, you should probably watch it and come back to this one. Or maybe you missed the last installment because of the content warnings, which I want to reiterate are the same for this episode. So if that was your reasoning, you may want to also skip this one. Okay, let's head right into it. This is an important announcement from future me. I underestimated the amount of information I had to share about this case. So there's going to be at least one more episode. But I'm going to do my absolute best to release 1 week after this episode, instead of the usual 2 weeks. Hopefully, I won't overestimate my abilities in the future, but it is a learning process. So, onwards to the show. Sorry for interrupting. Cynthia Lynn Haskins was born on January 19th, 1962, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her introduction to the world was an extremely painful one. The tiny newborn was suffering from a bilateral inguinal hernia, which I won't define for you here because just thinking about it hurts me. If you desperately want to know, Google it. Suffice it to say that the first 5 weeks of Cynthia's life were pure agony. Every time she was held by her mother, her pain would only increase. Her mother, Sally, was forced to wait for the surgery that would end her daughter's pain because she was too small to have a safe surgery, and I can only imagine how stressful that was for both of them. The first few weeks of a baby's life are a critical time for bonding, according to psychologists. Though Cynthia's surgery was successful, the damage to her and her mother's bond had already been done. They were never close, and most would describe their interactions as fraught and combative. Cynthia was always more close to her father than her mother, and she would always be more comfortable around men than women. Sally was a mother to another child already, a son named Robbie. Sally would describe Robbie as a delightful child, a marked difference from the cold way in which she referred to her only daughter. It didn't surprise me much to find out that Cynthia and Robbie didn't get along. Sally's marriage was never a perfect match, and by the time Cynthia turned 2, it had become openly violent. Both parents would strike each other in front of the children. This would frighten the kids, leading to what Sally described as tantrums from Cynthia. Sally's reaction to these tantrums was to slap her 2-year-old daughter in the face. Excuse me, but what in the actual hell? What exactly was that supposed to accomplish? Anyway, Cynthia began to withdraw within herself when she watched her parents fight. I mean, probably because she didn't want to react in case she got belted. And she'd watch the proceedings with a, quote, empty stare. Unsurprisingly, Cynthia's parents divorced, but not before Sally had a third child, Jeff. Cynthia loved Jeff, She doted on him. Sally was quoted as saying, "Cindy and Robbie constantly fought and argued and played one against the other, but there was a real bond between Cindy and the baby. Jeff was probably the most loving child I've ever seen. When he reached out with his little arms, you couldn't have anything to do but love him. Cindy was never that way. She didn't like to be held and loved, and it was hard to love a child that doesn't want to be loved." Sally had trouble caring for her children as a single mother, especially after she was fired from her steady job. She decided to try to make her one-time dreams come true, and she'd set out on the road to try and make it as a singer. Her children were placed with relatives. Robbie with her parents, Cynthia with an aunt and uncle, and baby Jeff with her sister. Being a singer wasn't as fun and glamorous as she'd thought it would be. She was only gone 4 months before she returned. She collected Robbie and Cynthia, but left Jeff with her sister when she offered to keep him for a while to help out. Not long after returning from her short-lived career as a singer, Sally met a man named Carl Anderson, and they began dating. She was impressed by him, and the pair became engaged and eventually married. Anderson convinced Sally to let her sister adopt Jeff, saying he wouldn't understand why he was being removed from the only family he could remember. She reluctantly agreed. It isn't explicitly stated anywhere how young Cynthia felt about this, but I can only imagine she was heartbroken to have her beloved baby brother taken away. Thus, it's probably not surprising that Sally and Cynthia's relationship only continued to grow rockier as she got older. Once, when 6-year-old Cynthia refused to promise to stay at home while her mother left, Sally tied her legs to the bedpost tight enough that she couldn't break free. Not exactly a recommended trust-building exercise, but hey, what do I know? Anderson was a very religious man, a devout Catholic, and it was probably his influence that had Cynthia enrolled in a parochial school. She did fairly well, but the nuns noticed that she liked to tell lies often. Robbie, though, became troubled when he noticed that 2 adult men in their apartment building would come over and spend time with his younger sister whenever the adults would leave. It's unknown exactly what happened here, but after he reported the situation to his mother, she did move the family to another apartment building right away. By the time Cynthia had turned 12, her relationship with her mother had become violent on both sides. It had gotten to the point that whenever her mother would slap her, she would slap her right back. And I'd like to say right now that no matter how badly Cynthia responded to her mother, she had the right to defend herself. If you hit kids, kids are either going to take it or learn to fight back. This goes for domestic violence in adults as well. Still, knowing that her parents couldn't force her to do anything that she didn't want to, she refused to go to more religious schools. Even though their relationship was so turbulent, there were obvious moments when Cynthia wished for her family's attention or support. In high school, she lettered in 2 sports, but eventually stopped playing when her family didn't come to any of her games. At the same time, Robbie was playing basketball and was the pride of the family. So she turned to friends in search of a place to belong, and she found it in the outsiders, the kids who did pot and were on the fringes. It was only amongst them that she felt accepted. Her new drug use didn't make things any better at home. She was 16 when her parents found a stash of drugs in her room. They gave her a talking to and made her promise not to take any more drugs. Of course this was a lie. Cynthia had also gotten into the habit of running away, sometimes for days at a time, and coming home late. She would frequently skip school as well. None of this improved when she met Ron Coffman, who also enjoyed pot and pills. Her parents weren't thrilled with any of this, and it only increased the fights they had. One night, after a particularly boisterous argument, Cynthia stormed out of the house and didn't return for 7 months. During this time, she took refuge with Ron and his parents, though they were less than enthused with her presence. It wasn't until January of 1980 that Cynthia returned home. This might have had something to do with the fact that she was now pregnant. She confessed her situation to her stepfather one day when he was driving her to school, and while he wasn't happy, he accepted the reality of the situation. Being as strictly Catholic as the family was, abortion was out of the question. It was decided that Cynthia would have the baby and then give them up for adoption. Plans got a little derailed when Cynthia took one look at her son and fell in love with him. She refused to let go. Grudgingly, Ron married Cynthia on October 18th of that year. Their marriage wasn't a blissful one. They spent most of their money on drugs and ended up living in a structure behind his parents' home. There was no indoor plumbing. It didn't take Ron long to start behaving abusively towards Cynthia. She endured 2 years of abuse before he ended up beating her so badly she was confined to their couch for 3 days. In response, she took her son and walked out. Cynthia did pretty well for herself at this point. She got an apartment and a good job. She was forced to leave her baby with her in-laws more often than she'd like, but she was doing her best to provide for him. When she was 21, she saved up enough to buy herself a car, a '77 Pontiac Trans Am. A Firebird, for those of you not in the know. I am legitimately jealous of that car, I won't lie. However, this purchase would be the point that her life would begin to derail again. An old friend of Cynthia's met up with her and began spinning her tales about the beauty of Page and Lake Powell. It's very beautiful up there, I have to agree. But the friend suggested they should drive to Page and get jobs in the area. There isn't much logic I can see in this, but Cynthia thought it was a grand idea. She left her baby with her in-laws and promised to come to get him before his next birthday in August. The two women arrived in Arizona to find that the only available jobs were at the Windy Mesa, a local bar. This is an actual bar, of course, that was around for a long time, but Google tells me it's permanently closed now. Which is a bit of a bummer because from the outside it looks like a piece of art. Coffman and her friend both got jobs there. Her friend decided to leave not long later, but Coffman stayed. She made some more friends, one of them a man named Doug Huntley. Doug and Coffman got along famously, first as acquaintances, and then as drug buddies, and finally as lovers. They would do pot and meth together often, and they got along so well that Coffman moved into Doug's trailer. Things went all right at first, but by the end of the month, Coffman would try to run Huntley down in her car. Similar to her actions with her mother, this was preceded by violence on Doug's part. However, trying to murder someone is a bit of an extreme reaction. Somehow, attempted vehicular manslaughter didn't end their relationship, and he even accompanied Coffman when she headed back to St. Louis in August to retrieve her son. She had kept in contact with him since she had left, and she was excited to be bringing him back to live with her. What Cynthia didn't know was that Ron Coffman had run a legal notice in the paper, notifying her about the upcoming dissolution of their marriage and his intention to take custody of his child. The notice had run from mid-June to early July in Missouri newspapers, and she had never seen it. So when she entered the Coffman home, she tried to take her baby, but they were having none of it. They made her and Doug leave, and they called the cops on them. This was how Cynthia found out the custody of her son had been taken from her. This whole situation is just appalling. It's so underhanded and unnecessary. It's so sad how it's an echo of her baby brother being taken away from her when she was a child. It doesn't excuse her later actions, but the situation does inspire some pity in me. Coffman returned with Doug to Page, where she immersed herself in work and drugs to forget her pain. She started taking cocaine and got herself a new job at a hotel. She also began to sell drugs. She left Doug's trailer, staying at a variety of different places in the area. Doug moved, and Coffman saw at least one other man during this time. But she was feeling restless and eventually wanted to move on. She chose to track Doug down in Barstow, California in 1985. Once again, they moved in together. Coffman found work at a local bar named The Maya, where a customer gave her the nickname Sinful. She settled into Barstow as well as she settled into Page, and for the moment, she and Doug seemed to be doing fine. The pair would even go skiing that winter up in Big Bear, where they stayed at the Bavarian Lodge. The Maya was a rough bar. Doug worried about her safety so much that he bought Coffman a small 2-shot Derringer for protection that she would carry around in her purse. We already know she continued to do so until her arrest. In the wee hours of April 5th, 1986, Coffman and Doug were stopped at a 7-Eleven. Before they could make their purchases, 4 men began to heckle Doug. They were shouting at him and trying to provoke a fight. Doug allowed himself to be taunted, and they all took their fight outside. When 2 of the men tried to jump Doug at once, Coffman drew her gun and warned them that she wasn't going to allow them to attack him as a group. The fight ended after Doug and one of the guys beat up on each other, and he and Coffman drove off together. The car was driving so erratically it attracted attention. A police cruiser was waiting for them back at their apartment, and when an officer saw that Doug was visibly under the influence of some kind of substance, he tried to arrest him. He resisted, and it took 2 officers to subdue him. While that was going on, Coffman heard a bulletin that they were looking for a man and a woman with a gun, and she fled into the apartment to get rid of it. She managed to hide the gun, but forgot about the drugs and pills in her bag. When an officer caught up to her and searched the purse, he found the stash and immediately arrested her. The police got permission from the building manager to search the couple's apartment, and found the gun and lots of drug paraphernalia, including bongs. It didn't seem Coffman was very talented at hiding things. They separated when they reached the jail, with Huntley being processed and put in a cell before Coffman. She made her displeasure with the experience known, cursing so loud that Doug and his cellmate could hear her from their cell. James Gregory Marlow was immediately intrigued by Cynthia Coffman. His new pal Doug had sung her praises while they sat together in jail, and she sounded like the sort of girl he would be interested in. She was released a full 5 days before he was, but he wasted no time showing up on her doorstep. When Coffman opened the door, Marlow was probably pleased to see that she was a pretty brunette, just his type. The fact that he knew that she was also a rule breaker that used heavy drugs probably sweetened the deal. For Coffman, she was attracted to Marlow immediately. She loved his many tattoos. The only tattoo that she didn't like was the tattoo he had on his penis that bore his ex-wife's name. This is a lot when you realize he also bore Nazi symbols on his body. She also found herself attracted to his, quote, bad boy qualities. I was fascinated when I was reading about this relationship. Coffman kept getting into relationships with abusive men, and in those relationships, she would respond to violence with violence, which mirrors the marriage between her mother and father in her childhood. And Marlow, well, we'll get to him. I don't have any kind of psych degree, but it's certainly interesting how these situations seem to mirror childhood traumas. But again, this could all be nonsense, a lot of hot air, and I just thought too deeply about it. Anyway, it didn't take them too long to start a sexual relationship. A lot of true crime docs made it seem like Coffman jumped his bones immediately, but that wasn't true. It was a couple of weeks before it began, and Marlow used his sob story to get Coffman to pity him first, which is a particular favorite tactic of his. Either way, Coffman dumped Doug, and she and Marlow ran off together. They stayed in Newberry Springs, California for a little while, in the trailer of one of Marlow's pals. It was in that Coffman learned that Marlow liked to tell tall tales. He'd frequently regale her of how he'd killed another inmate in prison for money, or how he and his ex, Beverly, had owned an Appaloosa ranch. Coffman learned not to trust anything Marlow said, because she'd always found out it was untrue at some point or other. Marlow also introduced her to new and interesting ways to get high. He specifically taught her how to inject meth, accelerating her addiction to the substance. In June of 1986, when Karina Novis was moving in with Mike in Redlands, Marlow got restless in Newberry Springs. He tried to convince Coffman to steal Doug's car so they could get his inheritance in Kentucky. She vetoed that idea. Not from any general goodness of the heart, but more because she didn't think Huntley's car was in good enough shape. She also didn't believe Marlow about his inheritance. When Marlow brought up another friend's pickup, she agreed without much extra persuasion. She already had a key to the truck, so stealing it would be easy, and on the way to Kentucky, maybe she'd get to see her son. In the middle of the night, they stole the red Nissan pickup truck. Marlow painted it black in the morning, and the pair set off toward Kentucky. They didn't have much money on this trip. To keep traveling once they hit Utah, Coffman sold off her and Doug Huntley's skiing gear, which she had stolen. They made a stop in Colorado to try to make some money. A past employer of Marlow's worked in the area, but he told him to try again in a few weeks in Atlanta. Though they managed to stay with friends for a couple of nights, they ran out of money on the trip. They couldn't afford any more motels, so they drove 700 miles without stopping to get to St. Louis. Coffman was welcomed lovingly by her grandmother, but was rebuffed when she attempted to see her mother in the early hours of July 3rd. Marlow said this visibly upset her, and she went to bed crying. Coffman would say that she wanted to pick up her son the next morning, but Marlow nixed the idea, saying they didn't have time. Instead, they borrowed $10 from her grandma and headed towards Pine Knot. Pine Knot, Kentucky, wasn't Coffman's ideal town. It was a very small, decaying town, mostly populated by bikers involved in crime. I can somehow hear that hashtag not all bikers already, and you're correct. But the group as described in this area of Kentucky operated as a kind of organized crime ring. They had a strong grip on the drug and moonshine operations in the area, and they would kill or maim to keep it. And Marlow had a lot of friends amongst them. Marlow was visiting some relatives when he found out that his grandmother had died, but there was no inheritance left for him. He wasn't too bummed, because I think he had made the whole thing up to get back to Kentucky in the first place. He seemed determined to bring Coffman back to Kentucky, just as he had been with all of his exes, but more on that later. The couple spent the 4th of July with a friend named Lardo, not his real name, in case you were wondering. They ended up staying with him for almost 2 months in all. A day after Lardo's drug and booze-filled party, he and Marlow headed out to hang with their buddies. One of the people there that day was a biker known as Killer, who was lamenting that he'd been hired to kill a man, but he didn't want to put in the effort. He hired Marlow as a sort of subcontractor for murder, for $5,000. Marlow replied that he had to think about it, and he went home to tell Coffman. Coffman says that she wasn't surprised when Marlow told her, because he had told her he had killed for money before. But she said she wasn't enthused, and she thought, what a fine mess I had gotten myself into. Either way, they agreed to do the job, and Marlow spent the next day being shown the way to Greg Wildman Hill's home. Apparently, Marlow's the kind of guy who needs very specific directions. On July 7th, 1986, Marlow and Coffman headed out at 5 a.m. in their stolen truck to carry out their mercenary plans. They drove 34 miles until they reached an area referred to as Dead Man's Holler, where Hill lived. Instead of staying in the holler, they drove to the top of a nearby hill and parked in the middle of a cemetery there to wait. As a side note, in case you didn't know, holler is a southern term that describes a sheltered valley, I believe. There are a lot of place names with the word holler in them. I don't know, I've only ever read the term, but that's one of the definitions I found online. So, the pair spied on the house for the rest of the day, and when they got bored, they went at it like bunnies. I mean, seriously, they're in a cemetery. Show some respect. Coffman says that as they spent time on that hill, Marlow began to turn into what she calls the wolf. Marlow would become crueler and meaner during these times. She told how, on July 8th, he forced her to take her shirt off and her bra and tie a bandana around her breasts. He then commanded that she lure Hill out to the truck. She knocked on Hill's door and told him her car had broken down and asked for his help. He agreed, grabbed a gun, and followed her out to the truck. Coffman continued, telling how Hill looked under the hood while she was told to try and start the truck. This was when Marlow ran from the woods and attacked the man. Hill tried to pull his gun, and he and Marlow fought over it, with Hill losing. He ended up shot by his own weapon. The pair left Greg Hill to die, and even stopped on the way home for sodas. Who knew contract killing was thirsty work? Marlow used his blood money to buy a shiny red motorcycle. He named it Big Red. Apologies to all the Nebraska fans out there. Marlow would even ride this bike to his and Coffman's not at all legal biker wedding. This was not quite the wedding Coffman dreamed of, according to her. She says that Marlow beat her quite severely the day before the wedding. So badly that one of his biker buddies tried to intervene. Marlow didn't take the interference well, and he knocked the biker off the deck so forcefully that he dislocated the man's arm. Coffman told more stories of a similar vein about this trip, but telling them all would make this episode far too long, so I'll only be recounting those that get brought up again. They finally decided to head out to Atlanta, so Marlow could try to get work with his old boss. Marlow traded his beloved Big Red in for a 70s Cadillac. He would later grumble that he wished he hadn't, and that he had only had because he thought Coffman was pregnant. Marlow also left Kentucky with a new tattoo. A spider with a ginormous penis. Out of all my research, this is probably the one time I laughed aloud. I don't know. Something about a spider schlong just seems funny to me. But they made it to Atlanta, and he did manage to meet up with his old boss and get a job. For a whole 4 days. Coffman would tell the story like this. One night, at the end of that 4 days, Marlow had gone out with Coffman and his co-workers to drink and play pool. While Marlow was getting into some sort of spat with some bar fellow, Coffman was watching the others at the table. A ball got stuck in the pocket, and Coffman tried to help the men by dropping another ball down the hole, thus loosening it. Somehow, her actions managed to enrage Marlow. When she, Marlow, and his boss left the bar to go eat at a restaurant, she says that she was forced to drive and that Marlow kept jabbing her with his elbow hard in the side. The boss even told him to stop hitting her and just let her drive. They arrived at the restaurant, and Marlow announced that Coffman and he were not eating. Coffman was scared, and she grabbed a cigarette vending machine, but he pulled her away from it and dragged her outside. Several concerned customers came to her defense, but when Marlow threatened to kill them, she told them everything was fine. After Marlow beat her in the car, they returned to the hotel they were staying at. He continued beating her in the room and then asked her where her scissors were. Coffman refused to tell him, so he searched the room and found them himself. He then held the scissors to her and asked whether she wanted to lose her hair or her eye. Coffman replied that she didn't want to lose either, but he told her she had to choose. So she chose her hair because it would grow back. Marlow then proceeded to cut her hair as close to her scalp as he could with the scissors. After that, he still threatened to take her eye. When he bored of that particular torture, he made her walk naked outside the hotel room. He let her back inside a few minutes later, only to sodomize her, as the sources say. For future reference, and so things don't get complicated concerning the two possible meanings of sodomy, I'm going to refer to it as anal rape from now on, which is a very terrible thing to have to say, especially while you're telling people it's a recurring theme. Coffman ended her story by telling how Marlow woke up, looked at her, said, "Oh no," and went back to sleep. His boss fired him that morning. Now began a pattern of freeloading, petty theft, and road trips. The pair headed back to Kentucky, stayed with a relative, and then got kicked out on their asses. Then they went to Page, then Greenhaven, Arizona, both times in search of money or a place to stay. Once they stopped at one of Coffman's old roommates to ask for cash. When the ex-roommate asked about Marlow's arm tattoos, whether they had hurt when he got them, he replied with, "It didn't hurt half as bad as the one on the end of my dick." Well, I wonder if the door hitting him in the ass on the way out hurt, because Coffman's ex-roommate didn't appreciate that kind of talk in front of her kid. She said she couldn't help them and kicked them out. I love that woman. Somehow, the pair managed to find another ex-roommate of Coffman's to stay with that night. It was about this time that, according to Coffman, Marlow began talking about a contract killing he could get 10 grand for in Phoenix. The only information he gave her was that the target was supposed to be a pregnant woman. They rolled back into Newberry Springs and stayed once again with Marlow's friend. This would not last long, because they weren't providing any money for food or rent. The friend and his wife kicked them out. But before they left, the pair stole 2 rings from them. With nowhere left to go, Marlow headed towards Fontana and his sister Veronica's home. But before reaching her home, they boarded with another of Marlow's endless cousins. While Marlow had stayed in Kentucky with Lardo, he'd become fascinated with a specific tattoo. And I'm not talking about the spider schlong. Anyway, while there, he had seen a tattoo on the arm of Killer's girlfriend that read, property of killer. This tattoo had gotten him all hot and bothered. Yuck. And he kept bringing it up to Coffman. One day, he just whips out this tattoo gun and tells Coffman he was going to tattoo her. He first tattooed wolf around her ring finger, surrounded by double Norse Savilo runes, which, if you aren't aware, have been co-opted by the Nazis, the bastards. Savilo is often translated into S in Latin languages, hence double Savilo symbols are a reference to the SS. This is from a man who swears he's not a Nazi, if you're wondering. Coffman wrote property of Folsom Wolf on a piece of paper and gave it to Marlow, before lying on the bed with her pants off. Marlow then proceeded to tattoo the words on her ass. See, I promised you an ass tattoo and I delivered. We just haven't gotten to the evidence part yet. Halfway through October 1986, they were kicked out once again. This time, they made it to a friend of Veronica's. Marlow didn't exactly know where his sister lived now, but her friend was happy to see them and called her over. Veronica was happy to see her big brother and took them both to the home she shared with her husband and her brother-in-law. They were not as enthused to see her surprise house guests. There was little that didn't cause friction amongst them all. Coffman told of increasing abuse during their stay. Angry one day that Coffman had spoken back to him, Marlow beat her and sliced her leg. She begged for a pain reliever, and he brought her 4 white tablets. After she took it, he told her it was cyanide and that she was, quote, a dumb bitch who was going to die now. And he told her, when you die, I'm going to take all your clothes off and I'm going to leave you on the corner. And I'll stop that quote there, because the rest of it includes a racial slur, but suffice to say it was pretty awful. After this, she told how he dragged her into the bathroom. There, he threatened her with a lit cigarette and questioned her about her feelings for other men. When he felt like she had lied in answer to his questions, he stabbed her in the leg with his knife, and she passed out. She woke up a day later and used a menstrual pad to stop the bleeding, which is a bit of time to go without proper medical care and potentially heavy blood loss. But maybe someone had stuck a Band-Aid on there in the meantime? Either way, according to this account, she spent all of October 31st holed up on Veronica's couch with a feminine hygiene product taped to her leg. Marlow began to love-bomb her, apologizing profusely and making her food and treats. But this time, it didn't last long. Not more than a few nights later, she told of how Marlow raped her with a knife to her throat. He said he wanted to kill her while raping her. On November 6th, Veronica's husband and brother-in-law had had enough. They told her that her brother couldn't stay any longer. An angry Veronica began packing her things. While doing so, she grabbed a .22 semi-automatic rifle. Angry, her husband grabbed the barrel and slammed the gun into the wall. Both of them proceeded to argue over who owned the gun. Maybe some sense of self-preservation made the man look behind him. But whatever the cause, when he did glance back, he saw Marlow standing in the doorway with a .22 caliber revolver pointed at his head. He told the man to calm down and left with Veronica and Coffman in her Buick Skylark filled with their things. He also stole a pair of handcuffs that hung from Veronica's husband's rearview mirror. The newly formed trio tried to stay with Veronica's friend, but they were soundly rejected. They did get to leave their stuff there, though. With nowhere left to go, Marlow headed to his old friend Richard Drinkhouse. Drinkhouse wasn't there when they arrived, but his wife permitted them to stay a few nights. When he did arrive, he found them already making themselves at home in his dingy little apartment. He didn't seem fazed about it, and he and Marlow spent the night boozing and reminiscing about the old days. On the morning of November 7th, Marlow, Veronica, and Coffman headed back to Veronica's friend's place. Marlow had Coffman change into a blue dress, and he asked the husband of the friend if he could borrow some nice clothes for an interview. They lent him a brown suit and a white button-up shirt that didn't really fit. He was also given a tie. They left, and Veronica drove towards her job in the Redlands Mall. While she drove, Coffman and Marlow discussed the hit in Phoenix, and how they were going to get enough money to get there. They were given Veronica's keys while she was at work, so they drove around trying to come up with ideas, but nothing came to them. They arrived back at the mall and decided to wait for Veronica. As they sat there, waiting, a girl driving a white Honda CRX drove into the parking space directly in front of them. Marlow watched her exit the car, noting her long brown hair and red fingernails. "That's the one we're going to get. She's the one," he said. Coffman was skeptical. She thought the young woman was too young to have much money, and that she wouldn't be worth it. But Marlow was certain. "Oh, yes, she will. She'll have money. Look at her car." The keys to the Honda had not been left in the ignition. All the pair could do was wait. Karina Novus had plans to go to a frat party that evening, and she had done her best to look nice. She still had a manicurist appointment to go to, but she wanted to buy some new earrings at the mall first. To this day, no one is quite sure whether she was convinced by Coffman to give her and Marlow a ride, or whether she was forced into the car at gunpoint. It's certainly possible that Sunny Karina felt bad for the shabby pair, and believed them when they said they wanted a ride to the college. However, her family firmly disputes this idea. However it happened, she ended up in a car with the pair. She was driving, with Marlow in the passenger seat, and Coffman perched upon his lap. Somewhere during this ride, a gun was pointed at her, and she and Coffman traded places. During the long drive to Richard Drinkhouse's apartment, she begged that the pair not hurt her car, because it was new, and she was trying very hard to take care of it. When they entered Drinkhouse's, he didn't seem shocked or horrified to see a frightened woman being towed about by Marlow. He said hi, and a polite Karina said hi back to him. He didn't ask any questions as she was dragged towards the bedroom. Inside the room, Marlow handcuffed her to the headboard. Coffman was left as a watchdog while he left to explain to Drinkhouse that they meant to force Karina's ATM pin out of her. Drinkhouse seemed uncaring and continued watching TV on the couch. Some while later, Drinkhouse did become curious as to what was going on in the bedroom. He snuck down the hallway and peered into the room. He saw only a little of Karina, her legs, before Coffman noticed him and informed Marlow that he was there. Drinkhouse fled back to his couch, but he still received a terse warning from Marlow to mind his own business. Veronica came back from work and received the same explanation that Drinkhouse got. She joined him on the couch. Some time later, Drinkhouse heard water running in the bathroom. As to what happened to Karina in that room, Coffman has a story to tell. After much pressure from Marlow and some exasperated encouragement from Coffman, Karina gave them the pen. Unfortunately, the horror had just begun. Coffman watched as Marlow put tape over Novus's mouth and announced that they were going to take a shower. He undressed Novus and himself and got into the stall. Coffman turned and walked away rather than observe Marlow sexually assault Novus. While the pair were in the shower, she retrieved some clothes and changed into them and out of the blue dress she had been wearing. Richard Drinkhouse would later testify that Coffman and Marlow had left the room together, and his hair was wet while she was wearing different clothing. When asked whether Coffman's hair was wet, he said that it was too short for him to tell. The pair dumped Karina's purse on the table and found some cash, which Veronica and Coffman used to make a run for soda, cigarettes, and beer. While they were gone, Drinkhouse said he heard Karina ask, "Are you going to take me home now?" And Marlow replied, "As soon as they get back." However, when they got back, she didn't go home. Karina was bundled into her car and driven out to an abandoned vineyard. The vineyard wasn't far from the drug dealer that Marlow, Coffman, and Veronica had been going to for meth, which is most likely how they knew of its existence. They drove the Honda into the vineyard and stopped the car, hoping for some coverage provided by the dead plants. Coffman told how Marlow ordered her to go get some drugs from a nearby dealer. She assumed that he meant to rape Novus again and left for 20 minutes. When she returned, Marlow was alone, and the pair departed from the vineyard. Aside from any stories told, one thing is an indisputable fact. Karina was murdered in that dark, abandoned vineyard. She had been strangled with a ligature, and when she was found, her face had been shoved into the ground with so much force that her mouth was full of dirt. The murderous pair wasted no time attempting to empty Karina's bank accounts. They went to the nearest ATM. Fortunately, in my opinion, the PIN that Karina had given them was false. They couldn't get into her accounts. Frustrated and annoyed, the pair searched Karina's car and found a map with an address circled, Karina's home address. They decided to toss the place in search of cash, saleable items, or the elusive PIN. They found the number, in addition to some loose change, an answering machine, and a typewriter. The typewriter was pawned for $30, while the answering machine was traded for a small amount of meth. They used Karina's PIN to try and get her bank balance, but it was only $15, and they couldn't withdraw it. So their total haul was a Honda, $30, some loose change from her purse and apartment, and a little bit of meth. That was all that Karina's life was worth to them. Forgetting their plan to head out to Arizona for that contract killing, they immediately spent $25 on more meth. Coffman also emptied Karina's large black purse and buried the contents, putting her things inside it. November 9th, the pair went out hunting for another victim in Huntington Beach, California. They didn't have much success. They ended up sleeping on the beach that night. The next day, the same day that Karina's boss went to her apartment to check on her, a woman narrowly missed having a run-in with the pair. She was driving a red Corvette and had blonde hair, and Marlow instantly wanted her. They followed her, but lost her in traffic, probably because a Corvette is faster than a fucking Honda. The blonde woman wasn't the only one to narrowly miss an unfortunate end. 2 high school seniors were heading to a party when their car broke down on the PCH near the Huntington Inn. When a man drove up in a white Honda, they thought they were saved. Surely he could help them with their car. After he asked them what was wrong with their car, the man turned to the woman in the passenger seat of the car and asked her, "Should I?" He received a yes in reply. He came over to look under their car, but realized they needed a jack. The girls didn't have one. They decided to go to a mobile home park next to the inn and ask a friend for a ride to get a jack. They asked the man whether he would still be there when they got back, and he replied, "Okay, I guess I might be here." He was gone when they returned. Within 3 hours, Coffman and Marlow had turned up between the Huntington Beach Taco Bell and KFC. They ordered some Taco Bell to eat in the car, and when they finished, Marlow decided they needed to ditch their IDs. He ordered Coffman to ditch hers and Novus's in the Taco Bell bag, along with his own. Then he strode to the KFC dumpster and threw the bag towards it. You see, Marlow has a problem. More than the obvious ones, I mean. He can't throw a bag of trash away to save his life. This will come up again. Just think, if he hadn't been too lazy to toss the bag into the dumpster, he and Coffman might not have been linked to the crimes. They definitely would have gotten away with it a lot longer. Thank the gods that he was so careless. The next day, Coffman and Marlow continued their search for victims. They ended up at Prime Cleaners just in time to see a woman leave the building alone. Coffman told how Marlow pointed out that she would be easy to rob. They kept hanging around the parking lot of Prime Cleaners. When it was dark enough that they would go unnoticed, Marlow tried to steal a license plate but was unable to turn the screws with his fingers. According to Coffman, she was forced to do it, and he punched her in her stab wound the whole time while berating her. Their first 2 plates were useless because of expired tags, but they finally got one on the 3rd try. Their next criminal foray was vending machine theft. Marlow busted his way into a vending machine and stole the coins. That netted him almost $20. They dined on fast food and slept in the Honda again. They woke with a determination to make some money. They searched for half the day before Marlow became impatient and decided to go back to the Cleaners and rob it. When they got there, they spent even more time waiting. Marlow even sent Coffman to look and see whether the girl inside was alone or not. A woman who came to drop off her clothes noticed the couple in the parking lot. She found their public displays of affection shocking. They stood there making out, one of Coffman's legs even wrapped around one of Marlow's. The woman felt uneasy as she drove away. About 2 to 3 minutes before Prime Cleaners was set to close for the day, the pair made their move. They walked into the store and Linnell greeted them, not knowing their real intentions. Linnell took a dry cleaning slip and Marlow, with his jacket in hand, told her he wanted it clean. As Linnell went to fill out the slip, He pulled his gun. He ordered Linnell into the back of the store and Coffman to lock the door. She locked it and also took the initiative to turn the open sign to closed. Marlow turned the lights off so the interior of the store was invisible to passers-by. The pair emptied the cash register and stole some clothes from the racks. Marlow got a new suit and a couple of shirts, and Coffman picked out a zebra print dress and sweater. Coffman wasted no time in changing into her fancy new outfit. Marlow duct-taped Linnell's mouth and handcuffed her wrists while Coffman brought the car around to the back door. They all got in the car. Just like before, Coffman was driving, with Marlow in the passenger seat and Linnell on his lap. He ordered Coffman to drive to the Huntington Inn. When they reached the inn, Marlow gave Coffman $50 and sent her to pay for the room. She was dismayed to find that the room cost $54 and had to pay for it on Linnell's credit card. When she told Marlow what happened, she said he was furious. He got real pissed and started throwing me around the room, telling me, "How could you use a credit card for $5? How stupid can you be?" He picked me up and threw me on the bed and knocked me off the bed. When she fell to the floor, she told of how a nail broke off painfully low. His rage continued till she thrust his $50 back at him, and he finally listened when she told him she had paid for the room on the credit card. He replied, "Oh, I'm sorry. Go to the bank. Get some food." Coffman left to find a Bank of America ATM, since that was where Linnell did her banking. The pair would take no chances. This time, they'd check that the pen would work. She drove 9 miles along the PCH before finding an ATM that would take the card. The card worked. Linnell had given them the correct PIN. All told, she withdrew $140 from Linnell's bank account, leaving her with a balance of 41 cents. She returned to the room with McDonald's. The first thing she noticed was that Linnell and Marlow both had wet hair. She says she knew that he had done it again. After eating, she was told to shower quickly if she wanted to, because they couldn't stay. She took a shower, while Marlow began trying to eliminate fingerprint evidence. She was surprised when he entered the bathroom while she was getting out of the shower and began tearing a wet towel into strips. She was even more surprised when he told her that she was going to kill this one. She refused, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. She told how he tore the towel into many strips and led her out of the bathroom, where he gagged and blindfolded Linnell with some strips. He bound Linnell's feet and then told Coffman to come to him. Coffman told how she looped the towel around Linnell's neck under Marlow's instruction and began to pull, but she couldn't continue. An irritated Marlow took one side and pulled while instructing her to pull the other. She half-heartedly did so, pulling and releasing several times, before Marlow took over. Coffman went and sat on the other bed in the motel room, with her back facing Linnell and Marlow and the volume on the TV turned up. She continued watching the TV until she heard Marlow begin to make denigrating comments about her. He ordered her to fill the tub 6 inches deep, and she did. He carried Linnell's body into the bathroom and positioned her over the side of the tub and draped her over the toilet. This next bit is bad, and I'm only just now realizing that I forgot to put it in my pre-episode trigger warnings. Possibly because I just wanted to block it out. But major trigger warnings for abuse and degradation of a corpse, and also just general misogyny. As the pair prepared to leave, Marlow entered the bathroom again, and Coffman would later testify to seeing him relieve himself upon Murray's body. The pair fled the scene and ended up in Ontario. I cannot tell you how confused I was before I found out about Ontario, California. Anyway, they got a swanky room with Linnell's credit card at the Compre. The room number was 333, which was only half the number they deserved. They got all dressed up and headed to Denny's, of all places, where they ordered steak and shrimp and chablis. You can order wine at Denny's. Maybe I just don't know because of the whole non-drinking thing, but I had no idea. Is this an 80s thing? Does anybody out there order wine from a diner? Anyway, to get back on track, the server noticed them that evening. First, she noticed Marlow's receding hairline and mustache, and Coffman's short hair. But their PDA was hard to ignore. She also would note that Marlow seemed glum, while Coffman seemed bubbly and cheerful. She served them, and they paid once again with Linnell's credit card. After midnight, the couple was seen buying champagne from a convenience store. In the morning, they checked out and went to a dealer to get more meth. They spent all the money they had made from 2 murders to buy 2 grams. After that, they needed some needles to take the drugs, so they headed to Veronica's house. Veronica wasn't there, and her husband and brother-in-law were not happy to see them. They didn't seem to know where she was. Coffman began calling some of her acquaintances to see if she could find out where she was. She called one friend who didn't know where Veronica was, but knew that the police had been looking around for her. Another friend told Coffman that the police had brought her in that morning. Coffman immediately told Marlow what had happened. He pretended not to care while looking at the morning newspaper. A morning newspaper with a picture of a white Honda CRX similar to Karina Novus's on the front. The article was informing the public about the missing girl and told them to look for the car. The pair knew they had to get rid of the Honda. They drove up near Arrowhead Lake and dumped the Honda outside a little touristy place called Santa's Village. While Coffman tried to wipe down the car with cleaning wipes to get rid of the evidence, Marlow was stuffing evidence into the pillow they had swiped from the hotel room. Coffman missed some of her prints while cleaning up, and Marlow once again didn't hide his trash well enough. They started hitchhiking, and a family gave them a ride to the lake, where they stopped to get a room at the Bavarian Lodge, an establishment Coffman was already familiar with. They got a room, did some meth, and decided they wanted to take the jacuzzi for a spin. Only they had no swimsuits. They walked to the nearby sports center to buy some swimwear. Upon entering, the owner of the store immediately noticed they looked odd. In addition to Coffman's short hair, Marlow was wearing what the man described as logging-type boots with his suit, and Coffman had extremely high heels on. I'm not sure when tall high heels became a suspicious thing for a woman in a dress to be wearing, but it is what it is, I guess. The pair not only picked out the swimsuits they came in for, but also got a hat and scarf and 2 pairs of designer shades that cost a cool $160 in 80s money. According to the inflation calculator I used online, those sunglasses would cost $433 today, when you round to the nearest dollar. They paid for all their extraneous garbage with Linnell's card, which is just an astonishingly foolhardy move. The pair had to know the bank was going to realize something was going on with the credit card sooner or later, so they buy useless junk with it? Not a brilliant plan. Marlow still wanted jeans to round out his purchases for the day, so they hired a dial-a-ride to get to another store. Here I was thinking dial-a-ride was for the disabled or elderly, but they're just using it like an Uber. Is this another 80s thing? So many questions. They arrived at the clothing store, where the salesperson also noted Marlow's strange choice of shoes and Coffman's short hair. Still, she was friendly and did her job. When Marlow asked her where they could go get some food, she recommended a place called the Iron Squirrel. Coffman asked if they could help her find black jeans, but they could only find blue for her. The pair ended up buying $255 of more shit, including more sunglasses. However, when the salesperson tried to run the credit card through the computerized system, this time it spat out a paper that read, "Call in." When she was connected, the Bank of America rep at the end of the line asked if the people using the card were still in the store. The woman didn't feel safe answering, but the rep understood what was going on. She asked her to stall them and stay on the phone. Coffman started getting nervous because of the holdup. She asked the woman what was going on, and the salesperson told her that the system was down. After another few minutes, Coffman asked the woman where a Bank of America was, and dragged Marlow out to find an ATM. They once again hired a dial-a-ride. The driver later told how they fought heatedly in the back of the car over who was going to pay for the ride. Coffman won the argument, and Marlow paid. Before they had reached their stated destination, the duo suddenly asked to be let out on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. The driver was confused, but did what they asked. Later, Coffman would tell that they heard someone talking over the dispatch radio. They said something along the lines of, "Stop by here, we want. Better drop your money off." The hesitant message tipped them off, and they were on the run. Not far from where they had fled, a helicopter hovered over the forest near Arrowhead Lake. They didn't find the fugitives, but they did find Karina's abandoned car. The woods in that area get very cold at night. Neither Coffman nor Marlow had any wilderness survival skills, nor had they brought any tools that might help them. They could only wander in search of some sort of shelter, but they did have an unhelpful tool at their disposal that they were pretty happy about. They had brought their meth. They managed to come upon a cabin building site. Helpfully, it even had a porta-potty. The pair helped themselves to the facility and found themselves even luckier that they spied a small, cavern-like spot, formed by the natural construction of some boulders in the side of a hill facing the cabin. Marlow and Coffman climbed into the tiny cave through a space in the boulders. They spent the night there. They were probably cold, hungry, and scared of all the forest sounds, but their brutal murderers so good. The next morning, they knew they had to get out of the forest because they were going to die if they stayed. But Marlow, he's a thinker, you know. He had the bright idea that they shouldn't wear the clothes they had stolen from the cleaners. It would attract attention. The only problem was that they didn't have their luggage, so they chose to wear the only things they had brought with them. The assorted bits and bobs that they had bought at the first store they had visited. This was how they ended up wearing such a bizarre mix of clothing, because that wasn't going to attract any attention. Secure in their foolproof disguises, they didn't notice when a dial-a-ride driver clocked them and called them into dispatch. I'll spare you the retelling of their capture at the hands of the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. Suffice it to say that they were captured and transferred to the Redlands Police Department. Coffman was questioned by Detective Hooper of the Huntington Beach Police and Detective Smith of the Redlands Police. Coffman was read her Miranda rights and immediately asked for a lawyer. The detectives decided to ignore this, which infuriates me. I don't care how awful a person is. We need to protect their rights the same as anybody else's. This is how innocent people end up convicted all the time. Also, in the interest of keeping anyone who listens to this safe, always ask for a lawyer if the police are questioning you. It doesn't make you guilty, it makes you smart. If they ignore you, stay silent or repeat your request for a lawyer. A family member of mine was a police officer at one time, and this was his advice. Coffman's response to their continued questioning was to say, "I messed up last time. I'm not dumb, just should have kept my mouth shut like I'm doing this time." But the police kept asking her questions, and she ended up answering them. They asked her if she knew where Karina Novus was, and she denied knowing anything about it at all. When they showed her a picture of Linnell Murray, she showed no reaction. Her face just remained entirely blank. Smith decided to try and sympathize with her to get a reaction. He told her how he knew Marlow controlled her life, and that he knew she was in over her head. To quote, "It's like a snowball rolling downhill. Just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you get deeper and deeper. And I believe that's what happened to you. Something you couldn't control because of him." Hooper jumped on the bandwagon, telling her she didn't have to be afraid of Marlow anymore because they could protect her. "Cindy, you're not a slave anymore. You don't do what he tells you anymore. You're a human being. You never have to be intimidated by him again. He'll never cut your hair again. He'll never put handcuffs on you again or beat you. He'll never gag you again. He'll never put a blindfold on you again, and he'll never urinate on you again." This was apparently a pretty good guess on his part, because the book says he didn't know about this particular act of desecration yet. The sympathy method had a great effect on Coffman, and she began giving bits and pieces of information about the case. And we're going to stop there. Next week for sure, Marlow's childhood and climb towards infamy. And if I can fit it in, the trial. I hope I can, folks, but I also don't want to give you 2 or 3 hour-long episodes. Some of you may have noticed I've been a little more free with my language this week, but it's for a good cause. I got this great idea from the folks on the True Crime New England podcast, link in details, of doing a swear jar for charity. I've chosen Child Crisis Arizona as the charity to contribute to, and at the end of August, I'll donate the full sum for all my swearing. Everybody wins! If you also want to contribute, I'll leave the link. Remember, I'm going to try to release the next episode next week, so not on the usual 2-week schedule. I'll tweet and post about it on my socials. Speaking of socials, follow me on Twitter at A Memory of Malice, on Instagram at AMOM_podcast. I have both a Facebook account for the show and a page at A Memory of Malice and at AMOM podcast, respectively. And lastly, a Tumblr, amemoryofmalice.tumblr.com. Links will be in the details in my link tree. See you next episode. Remember to stay safe and hydrated, okay? It's really rough out there right now.